All right. Good morning, guys. How are you? Can you all hear me okay? Somebody give me the thumbs up.
I can hear you.
Okay. Perfect. We're going to just dive right in because we've got lots of great stuff to go over today. We're going to be talking about contract to close from the point that you are under contract. So you have either sold a house to your buyer or to your seller. And then, and those steps look just slightly different. But there's a lot of things that you're going to be doing with both. So we'll kind of break it down and show you even individually. Like when you have a listing, there are some different steps that you're going to take. So for example, you have a lockbox and a sign, and you're not the one like getting your buyer to schedule the home inspection and things like that. For everyone who's here in person and on Zoom, who has sold? I know we got a lot of brand new people on here. Has anybody sold a house to a buyer or seller who's on today? I know Leah has.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Oh, what did you say, Gina?
I said, I know you've sold a house before. I was asking the group who has sold a house to a buyer or seller. I know we have a lot of really new people on today.
Okay, yes, I definitely have. Yes.
Yep. Okay, well, I'll take that to mean that no one else has, and I'm pretty sure based on who I can see is on here, that's probably the case. So you'll ask yourself, why is it important for me to attend a class like this if I haven't even sold a house yet? So I appreciate you all coming, dedication to your business, and here's why. Even though I'm going to be here and Janice at Living will be here to help you guys through this, mentoring you through the whole process, and answering your questions along the way, it's a good idea to have some idea of what that transaction looks like. So some of us have also bought and sold houses that we also live in, and some of us have not. Even if you have, it's still going to look different on this end of things. I hear a lot of people say, well, I bought and sold a lot of properties over my life, so that makes me know how this process is going to look. And that's not necessarily true, because actually, if I'm honest, it's not at all true. Because when you're on the end of the agent, there's a lot more things that agents do that I will tell you that the buyers and sellers don't even realize that we do. So from this end of it, we also need to know exactly what those steps look like. But more importantly, you'll need some kind of a background so that we don't let anything slip through the cracks. So this form, I'm going to start to do a share screen. So if anybody has any questions at all, please just unmute yourself and chime in, because what's going to happen is you guys are shrunk down to a little corner of my page, and I won't necessarily be able to see you all if you just do a little raising of the hand. So please do just jump in, unmute yourself, interrupt me all you need to, and ask your question or tell your story. All right. So this form I created, it sort of is, exactly what it's called: steps to follow from contract to close. It doesn't mean it's limited to this, because certainly every transaction is different. And there's other things that could potentially come up. But these are the basic things we're going to focus on doing. The last thing that we want to do is, be in a pending transaction, whether you represent the buyer or the seller, and you skip something. And something that you skip may seem very small, but can become extremely important. So that's why we do this class and we jump in. So just to lay the groundwork, at this point, we're going to just say, I'm going to intertwine the differences of the buyer or the seller rather than running through this list once as a buyer and once as a seller. So this form is in the Google Drive training folder, so you guys all have access to it. I have another one. This is the most recent condensed version, but I have a little bit of a longer version of this form also in the drive that you guys have access to. So All right, so let's just say we've put in all the hard work and we've gotten our buyer or our seller and we start through the process. I'll also tell you that, and do keep this in mind, everybody, that almost, not always, but I'll say for me, almost every buyer I'm working with, they're also my seller. I think we can pretty much all agree that we're not only selling houses to first-time home buyers. So that means that most people are buying and selling. And so if we have presented ourselves properly in the beginning, and we got in contact with them in time, you're going to be able to have both sides of that. So I can tell you that probably the last 5 transactions that I've had, those were actually 10 transactions because both of those, I got both the list and the sell. So right now I have a seller, we're pending, and and that seller bought a house and we're also pending. And the reason I'm bringing that up is this: when you're doing it at the same time, that client, they start to merge those transactions like they're one. And it's our job, besides the system checklist that we're gonna go over, I want you to understand the kind of your role here and how we have to really monitor the situation, set expectations, and counsel our client. So I know probably no one told you this in real estate school, but like, it would have been really great if you went to college that you took some psychology classes, because we definitely are counselors. We are, life coaches and therapists through transactions a lot. So we really have to make sure that we keep our people grounded and set expectations. So one of the things that tends to happen when 2 transactions are going on with one client like that is they like to make it seem like it's one transaction, and they are 2 totally separate deals. So what I mean by that is, just because this thing is happening on their house doesn't mean it's going to happen on the house that they're buying also. So for example, in this example I'm giving you with my seller, who's also a buyer, the buyer of their house did do a home inspection. We had to sell their house before they could buy. So when they have to sell before they can buy, well, then we have to do it in that order, right? We couldn't go buy something first until theirs was under a contract. And so because we're in such a competitive market right now, and also be aware with that, it depends on the kind of market that we're in. With them, they've missed out on several properties. We made lots of offers, we looked at lots of houses, and they lost out on them. So they decided when we got to this house that they actually bought, that we have got to go in really strong and competitive. So they paid 25,000 over asking price because there was like 11, 12, 13 offers on the property. They also waived inspections, and they also did an appraisal gap. Does everybody know what those things mean? I don't like to presume when I say things like that, that you guys all are like, yes, I know exactly what she means. So does that make sense? Paying over asking price and doing an appraisal gap? Yep. So great question. That's what I was looking for. So thank you. An appraisal gap means that the buyer's putting enough money down that it doesn't matter what the appraisal comes back at, that they will still pay the offer amount for the house. So like in their case, the house was 225, they offered 250. They're putting more than 20% down. So as long as we don't under appraise by more than 20%, we'll be okay. But they have more money than that. So if they needed to, they could put more money towards that gap. You only would need to worry about that if the house doesn't appraise for the 250. That was the purchase price. They also qualify for an appraisal waiver. So that is something that the bank can offer to them. They can't say, I want to do one. The bank has to say so. In a cash transaction, usually people don't do appraisals. So that would be, that in that situation. But nonetheless, that's what they had to do to get this house, right? They had to pay 25,000 over. They did the appraisal gap and they also waived inspections. That is not the scenario on the house that they're selling. The house that they're selling, although we did have multiple offers and we did get 10,000 over asking price, that buyer does want and did do a home inspection. They are not doing an appraisal gap. And they only paid 10 over. So when we had repair requests on the house that they're selling, of course, their first comment was, but we didn't even do a home inspection on the house we're buying. And so we're certainly not asking for repairs. Why are we having to do repairs on our house? Because it's two different transactions. Also recently, the house did not appraise. So they had to bring their price down by $10,000. So that 10,000 over the buyer was willing to pay on their house, it didn't appraise for that. So we actually had to bring the price down. The house that they're buying did appraise. So, and they were already doing an appraisal gap anyway, so it wouldn't have mattered. So again, that kind of makes a seller slightly salty because they're like, wow, now I've got to come down 10,000 and we were doing this appraisal gap on the house that we're buying. One has nothing to do with the other. So that's where we have to walk them through and have them understand that. And sometimes we have to repeat ourselves about that over and over and over again. Does that make sense? Okay. And so then we're plugging along on both these transactions exactly at the same time. And then we're having as the agent to remember all the things to do. So a couple of ways to stay organized. One is in Dotloop. So Dotloop is where all of your contracts are at and all your paperwork's at. So in Dotloop, there's something called tasks. So you could certainly take this list and create a task list in your loops. My recommendation is don't do tasks. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, because you've been in Dotloop, will understand this. Create the tasks in your templates. Don't create the tasks in each individual loop. The reason why is because then you'll have to recreate them every time. If you create them in templates, then they'll pull over with your loops. So do it there because you're going to do it every time. And then those tasks are done like a checklist. If that's where you need to do it, that's a great idea. You can always print this form out. You can do a spreadsheet if you're a spreadsheet person. However, also some people do a whiteboard. I love a whiteboard where you have all of your pending transactions listed and then the list of things that have to be done throughout the transaction that you're checking off. Whatever it is that you need as a visual, my recommendation is to have one. It's at least in your first 10 transactions. And if you only sold to buyers, then you need to do a whole nother 10 for listings before you can think that you'll remember all the things. And even then, I have little sticky notes everywhere to remind myself of all the things that I need to do. All right, so let's plug forward and then I'll kind of identify the differences between what you're doing for a buyer and a seller and or both. Okay, so whether you're working with a buyer or a seller, you need to make sure that you have all of your documents fully signed. So as a buyer, an agent of a buyer, you're the one who's writing the offer, right? When you're working with a seller, you're the one who's waiting for the buyer's agent to send you the offer. Couple of things I'll say about that. When you're the buyer's agent, you're using our Keller Williams contract. You've already learned about it, I trust. You know what it's like. You know what it looks like. You know what documents are required of you. You know what the purchase agreement is, how to explain it to your client, and know this, every brokerage has a different contract. So where that complicates things for you all is when you're a listing agent. So when you're a listing agent, you may not be selling the house to an agent that's from Keller Williams. By the way, Keller Williams Living and Keller Williams Legacy have different contracts because we are different brokerages. So you will have different contracts with a KW depending on which brokerage they are. And so there's no way of, becoming an expert on every single person in town's contract until you're just in the business and you start getting used to them. But they also update theirs just like we do and make changes. So I guess what I'm saying there is just be aware as a listing agent, chances are you're going to get a purchase agreement and paperwork from another brokerage, from an agent, from another company, and we need to read it. I know it sounds like a simple thing, but most people just don't know because they didn't read it. So we need to be aware of those contracts and we need to understand them ourselves. And if you have questions, ask the agent who sent you the contract. So that way you can better be equipped to explain those details to your client. When you're the buyer's agent, you're driving the bus because you're the one who wrote the offer. So you have a full understanding of that. This negotiation part is gonna go back and forth, maybe once, maybe twice, a couple of times. Again, as a listing agent in this market, we're blessed with such a great seller's market. However, the double-edged sword of that is we're typically in multiple offers. And when you're in multiple offers, now you have all kinds, let's just say for the sake of making it easy for conversation, we have 5 offers. It could be 25. I mean, I've had as many as 25 offers on a listing, and it's a lot of paperwork to try to keep separated and go through. But we'll say we have 5 offers. We're going to keep those loops all separate. We're going to have a discussion with our seller about these offers separately, and we're going to work our way through the negotiations, which we, by the way, just did in our multiple offer workshop a couple weeks ago. In any case, if they accept one, because they like the way that offer looks, they're just gonna sign it. We're gonna plug in their initials on all the pages, we're gonna plug in their signature on all the pages, and then they're agreeing to the contract as it is, and we just send it back to the agent, and it now is a fully accepted contract. If there's negotiations happening, because maybe we don't like exactly how the offer is written, so then we're going to go back and forth 1 time, 2 times, whatever. This is something that I've actually caught in a couple people's situations is they came to an agreement and there was 2 sets of signatures on the paperwork and initials. However, 2 of the changes or 3 of the changes or all of the changes on the contract never got initialed. So if that's the case, we don't have a fully signed contract. So imagine that your client thinks that we do and you're plugging along and then we come to find out, uh-oh, we don't actually have a fully signed contract. So I can't stress it enough that all parties must fully sign all of the documents, dates. If you're using .loop, it's going to predate it. By the way, you don't have to add extra dates on .loop documents because when they signed it automatically dates. But that everything that has been changed and all of the documents are fully signed. So for a second, and I won't live on this too long, I do want to mention, I've had buyers that have done this before. I don't agree with page 3 of the property disclosure. I don't know what that means. What do you mean you don't agree with it? The seller's disclosing something to you. And what they're saying in this case is, I don't like that defect. And I don't want to sign that page because I feel like that means I'm agreeing to it. And they're actually correct. That means that they're acknowledging that it was disclosed and they're kind of agreeing to, well, they are agreeing to it. So when a buyer doesn't initial a page, we don't have a fully signed contract. It's so when I say that, I don't just mean that they have to have signed all of the documents. Every page of every document needs to be signed and or initialed. If one initial is missing from one document, let's say a property disclosure, you do not have a fully signed contract. We need to work through how we're going to get that document signed. If it's not fully signed, that means that either party could void the contract at any time. So that's a really important thing to understand and learn how to get through. But once everything is fully signed, you'll want to also make sure, and I know some of you could chime in and tell me because you've either just recently taken your test or are waiting to test. A contract becomes a contract upon delivery. So when your client signs it, but you didn't do anything with it, it's not a contract. It's only upon delivery. So that means once you send that paperwork back to the other agent and then they send it to their client, now we're under contract. Questions about the contract and it being fully signed before I move on?
People say, in my old job, my manager was actually a realtor too.
Mhm.
He said that on his first transaction, he thought it was under, or I don't know how exactly he said it. Basically, like he spent the money that he thought he was gonna be making and it fell out at the last minute.
Yeah.
And he was saying that like, that's like a common thing.
So what he's saying is this, as agents, we get really excited when we have pending transactions. And we were always calculating our commissions. And so let's just say I have a pending transaction and I know I'm gonna make $3,000 on it. In my mind, I have that $3,000 coming because the deal is pending. And then if the deal falls through, we don't have that money. So you don't have money in the bank when you sell a house. You have money in the bank when it closes.
How long after like the time that I guess you sell it, typically does it take until it actually
Yep.
closes?
Most transactions take about 30 days to close. So that could vary. If it's cash, they could be done sooner. Also, some banks could get done before 30 days if they do like their pre-approval comes along with having actually collected all the correct documents. They might be able to get it done in 20 days. Title work still has to be done. Payoffs have to be gotten by the title company for the house that's being sold. So there's a lot of factors for it to get done in 2 weeks, but it can if it's cash. And if a lender's, upfront pre-approval is very strong. But I would say as a rule of thumb, it's 30 days. Some loan types could take 45 days. So like VA could take a little longer sometimes, not always. So that question would be a question that you'll want to have with that lender. So when you're working with a buyer, there's a couple of things you want to know from the lender. Does the buyer, so definitely write this down, guys. This is a little bit ahead of under contract, but we'll talk about it since we're talking about it. What do I need to know when I'm working with a buyer from the lender if I'm about to write an offer? For one, they need to be pre-approved and you need to have a copy of it. And you need to have a conversation with the lender asking a couple questions. Well, of course, the pre-approval letter is typically going to say what they're approved for, but the buyer should know how much money they're putting down. Sometimes they might say things like, well, I know how much I have, but I don't know how much the lenders are requiring me to put down. So that might be a question. We want to ask the lender how long they need for closing. And we need to ask, does this buyer need any kind of credits from the seller for concessions? So that means, do we need to ask the seller to pay for the buyer's closing costs?
What was the question?
Do we need the seller to credit the buyer towards their closing costs? Sometimes the lender is going to say, hey, this buyer, they've only got the money for their down payment and they don't have money for their closing costs. And when that is the case, we have to also find out from the lender, well, how much is that? Don't try to answer the question, how much are my closing costs going to be? There's so many factors involved in interest rates and closing costs that we can't possibly answer that question. That's a lender question. So those are things we'll want to know before we write an offer. All right. So once we have that fully signed contract, and everybody's been shared the documents back, we as the agent, whether it's our listing or our buyer, want to share the documents with the title company. A lot of times, like if you're using our in-house title company, which is American Title Solutions, you'll have a representative who you're always going to work with. So like Melissa is my representative in American Title Solutions. That is different than Sam and Andrea, who are doing the promoting of the company. That's not your rep. Those are the promoters. Your rep is somebody in-house who's going to handle the file. You'll be assigned someone if you're using them and you'll know who they are once you've had a transaction. If you're using a different title company, there's probably not going to be a particular rep you're going to know. You're going to need to find out who's handling this file and get them the paperwork. And yes, both sides are going to send the same paperwork to the title company. That triggers the title company to know who are the two agents involved in this transaction. So don't assume because you're the listing agent that the buyer's agent's going to send the paperwork. You're sending the paperwork and so is the other agent. If you're a dual agent, then obviously you're only doing it once and you're just letting them know that you're in fact a dual agent. If you're working with the buyer, you're also going to send the paperwork that's fully signed to their lender. Obviously, if you're working with a seller, you're not doing that. That's up to the buyer's agent to do. Here's also what you need to know. We don't have to send everything. We're only sending things pertaining to the contract. So purchase agreement, agency disclosure, any other property disclosures or lead-based paints, ABAs have to be included, anything pertaining to the contract. You don't share your exclusive buyer's agency agreement with the other agent when you're writing an offer. That's a contract between you and your client. Unless we have a commission situation, which is a whole nother class and topic. In any case, you also don't need to worry about sending that to the lender or the title company. It's just the things pertaining to this particular transaction. Any addendums written also have to go to the title company and the lender. I would also include home warranty applications if they're doing a home warranty. Whether you represent the buyer or the seller, in particular, when you represent the buyer, we need to make sure that our client has turned in their earnest money to the title company. Let me also stress this because I don't remember who it was, but I was helping somebody with an offer on a listing of theirs. And this particular brokerage wanted to hold the earnest money. So let me say a couple things about that. Keller Williams does not hold earnest money. So there's in no way should your client ever write their earnest money check to Keller Williams. And we really don't want another brokerage holding our client's earnest money either. We want it to go to the impartial middleman who isn't working for any brokerage or any side of the transaction, meaning buyer or seller. We want them to hold the earnest money. And so of course I had to explain to this agent who's in coaching how she needed to explain to the other agent where we would like the HUD title company to hold the earnest money. Lots of reasons why that is something that we want to have happen. When we represent the buyer, we may need to remind them, hey guys, did you turn in your earnest money? They can turn it in a couple different ways. They can actually write a check for their earnest money and then deliver it to the title company. We should never be putting our hands on somebody's earnest money. I can tell you this, one of the top reasons that agents get their license suspended or get fined is for mishandling earnest money. So when I hear that, that doesn't make me feel like I should want to put my hands on somebody's earnest money check. They can turn it in. Most title companies do electronic deposits. I know American Title Solutions does. So then I just tell the title company, can you please email my client the link so they can electronically deposit their earnest money. But if they choose to drop off a check, that's entirely up to them. When we represent the seller, we aren't ever talking to the buyer. We're only talking to their agent. So in that case, I want to make sure as a listing agent that the earnest money also got turned in. You might be thinking, well, why? Well, here's why. If the earnest money never gets turned in, and I never verified as a listing agent that it did, and then the buyer goes and breaches the contract, and then the seller should be getting that earnest money. Imagine the bad conversation I now have to have with my client saying, I never verified it got turned in. They've breached the contract and there is no earnest money. So we need to double check. I don't just rely on checking with the buyer's agent. I contact the title company and say, hey, can you verify that the earnest money was actually turned in? And it should absolutely be done within 5 days.
5 days on.
5 days of the fully signed contract. And we'll go far as say 5 business days because the title company has to be open, right? It's reasonable to say 5 business days or 5 banking days. They also have to make loan application in that 5 days. So the buyer has 5 days to make loan application. Sometimes buyers don't use the lender that they have a pre-approval with. Maybe they got a pre-approval and they're still out there, looking at interest rates and costs at other places, and they decide they're going to use somebody else. They have that right. They don't have to use the person they've got the pre-approval with, but they have 5 business days to decide. And then if they're going to switch lenders, you as the buyer's agent need to make sure you get a new pre-approval letter and get that over to not only the listing agent, but also the title company that we've switched. They have 5 days to make that decision. They shouldn't be switching lenders 15 days into the transaction unless we know we have a problem. meaning that there's some hiccup that we found out that this lender's not going to be able to get them approved, and that's why they're switching, which sometimes does happen. Here's another thing that happens a lot. It just happened recently in a transaction. The buyer's agent said, my buyer's not going to turn in their earnest money until after the appraisal. And I'm like, yeah, that's not, so there's all kinds of agents that do things a little differently, and that's really kind of hokey to me, especially because they wrote the contract and it's on their contract that it gets turned in upon delivery. So understand this, they could change that. They could change their purchase agreement to say that earnest money be turned in after inspection. So you have to watch that really closely. Doesn't happen often, but it does happen. So be aware of that. All right, so loan application happens. As a listing agent, we're also making sure that that's plugging along. By the way, as a listing agent, do you have the right to contact the buyer's lender? I'm asking that as a question. Do you guys think that you have the right to do it?
The right to.
To contact the buyer's lender?
Yeah,
Obviously, because that happened in Mike's transaction.
Correct. And so we do. The lender's not allowed to tell us anything private about the buyer, but as a listing agent, I most definitely contact the buyer's lender to make sure that things are rolling along or answer any questions that are things like, why hasn't the appraisal been ordered yet? Because also the appraisal being ordered during that time frame is really important. We don't order appraisals as agents. That happens with the lender for the buyer. That's part of their process, but as a listing agent, we want to make sure, and a buyer's agent really, that that's actually happening. Let's see. So a couple of things about this. So you may be, and some of this is going to sound foreign to some of you, when you created your loop in dotloop for this offer, you would have started by creating an opportunity in Command. And so that's a whole nother class. So if that doesn't make sense, I promise it will at some point. So you'll have created a opportunity in Command. You'll have transported that into dotloop to have your contracts. And so when it says here, through your opportunity, you're going to submit docs for compliance. That's something that's happening in Command. And we'll teach you how to do that if this is your first time hearing that. Schedule all inspections immediately. Remember, you have a deadline. So if you represent the buyer, you're the one who's talking to your buyer about the inspections that they wanted to have. So if they're doing, let's say, just a home inspection, I would not recommend that you make those calls. You should, when I say schedule them, I don't mean you should be calling around and actually contacting the inspectors. Your client should be doing that. You want to follow up with your client and say, hey, have you contacted the home inspector? And when is the home inspection going to happen? Here's why you don't want to be scheduling things. If the buyer doesn't show up at the home inspection because let's say they're at work or something, the home inspector wants paid. And you're the one who scheduled it. Who do you think that they're going to go try to collect from if this deal falls apart and the buyer never pays them? It's going to be you. So there's some responsibility on the client. And one of those things, in my opinion, is they need to contact their own inspectors, and then I will schedule it with the listing agent. So whether they're doing a home and well and septic, whatever it is, those kinds of things need to be done in a timely manner. Be very well aware that that purchase agreement says that those inspections will be done within a period of time. They need to be done during that time. What do you think happens if your buyer doesn't do their home inspection in the 10 days maybe that you put on the contract? I'll tell you, that means that either the seller doesn't have to let them do the inspections, or the seller can let them do the inspections, but now their contingency that said they had the right to also void the contract or ask for repairs is gone. That died at the end of the day that you said that that deadline has expired. So you need to sometimes have those hard conversations with those clients who are a little bit lazy about these kinds of things, because it's going to be to their detriment that they didn't get it done in a timely manner. So let me also say this. Not only does the inspection have to be scheduled by that deadline, it has to be complete and we have to have gotten results back, because by then we need to know, are we asking for repairs or are we voiding the contract? So there's a couple of inspections that we can't control getting results back. That would be like, well, we don't typically have issues with, but it's septic. Septic inspections, the county has to approve and they're on their own time frame. So you want to allow for enough time for that, and or write an additional addendum saying we're extending that period during that time. And again, I know this is a lot. I'll walk you through this process as it's happening to make sure we don't have those things go wrong. If your client has a home warranty, we sold the home warranty. So that means I wrote an offer, my buyer wanted a home warranty. It doesn't matter if the buyer or the seller is paying for it. I need to submit that application. I'm also sending a copy of that to the title company so that they're aware. So, there's a website through our home warranty company where we do those submissions. And if you want your $100 referral for that, you have to do the data collection form as well, which has ages of things that have to be included. So we're responsible for that. And if you're working with a seller and the buyer's agent put that in the offer, then it's still their responsibility, not yours. The only time as a listing agent, it's your responsibility to submit the home warranty application is if the seller decided to do the home warranty prior to the offer and they're including it with the sale of the house. That's different than it was part of the offer. Attend the home inspection if you're the buyer's agent. You should most definitely attend. Honestly, even if the buyer's not going to attend for some reason, you should attend. I can pretty much tell you that most listing agents are going to expect that an agent is going to be there. If for some reason you cannot attend, then you need to find another agent in the office that will on your behalf. There's all kinds of agents that are willing to do that. We typically pay them to do it because it could be 2 hours, it could be 3 hours or more. I've been at really long home inspections before. There's a lot of reasons why you want to be there to keep things under control, but it's also your responsibility to protect that person's house. Now, when I say the agent be there, I don't mean the listing agent. I mean the buyer's agent. Make sure this happens all the time too. When you schedule the home inspection, that the seller's agent realizes that we don't want the seller there. They do know that, by the way, as a listing agent, I know that my seller should not be home for the home inspection. And I tell them that, but not every agent does. There are situations where people can't leave their home. Someone who's elderly, I mean, I've had people that were bedridden, like they just can't. So of course, we're gonna bend on those situations, but you know, just because they don't want to leave is not a reason. It makes the buyer very uncomfortable to have a seller home watching while this inspection is happening. So we want to make sure that's not happening.
How do you go about asking them to like leave?
So it's all about expectations and setting expectations from the beginning. So as a listing agent, when I'm listing the property, I'm going through kind of a checklist similar to this of things they should expect. And one of those things is, hey, just so that you know, here's how the showings are going to go, and here's how the inspections are going to go. You'll plan on not being home during the showings, and you'll also plan on not being home during the inspection. The inspection could take 2 hours or 3 hours or more, depending on the size of the house and what kind of detail is involved. And each property is different that way. Now, if it's a really small house, that doesn't mean it's going to take an hour. They still have plumbing, electrical, furnace, you know, all those things are the same. It's going to be probably a minimum of 2 hours for most inspections. And so if you set that expectation up front, then they won't usually give you a problem with it.
Okay.
If it's a health issue, that's different. Also, they should get their pets out of the house for the inspection too, just like you would for a showing. This is also, by the way, not the opportunity for the client to bring all their family and friends to come see the house.
At the inspection?
Yeah. So you want to control that as a buyer's agent, and that's also why you want to attend. I mean, I've gotten those horrific phone calls where they're like, who the hell is at the house? My seller just drove by and there's a line of cars, you know, that kind of thing. So that's why we want to make sure we're there to control those kind of situations. We talked about well and septic. If there's a pest inspection, we want to also coordinate that so that gets done. It's okay if the seller's home for the pest inspection. It's also okay if they're home for the appraisal. Get a copy of the inspection if you represent the buyer, if they're going to ask for repairs. So I'll spend a minute talking about this. Here's something I don't do. I don't tell my buyer, get me a copy of the home inspection so that I can tell you what I think you should ask for. Never. It's not, don't put weight on your shoulders because you're trying to be the professional that you now have put yourself in a situation where you miss something, maybe something that you think is important, they do not, and vice versa. So just because I see something and I think one thing, they might think something else. So the conversation I have with my buyer about the home inspection is this. Once you get the home inspection report from the home inspector, please feel free to send me a copy. And then I want you to review it. And then I want you to email me a list of questions and concerns and notate the page. And then you can send me the report and then I'll look at your questions and concerns. And then we're going to have a conversation about it. Because some of the things really are questions and not just, I want this fixed. And then let me call the listing agent and see if we can get some answers to some of these questions. And then we can address those concerns. And then if those concerns are major defects that are material latent defects, we can get a contractor to give us an estimate. If it's not something we need an estimate, we can then write up the release of contingency asking for the following repairs. Of course, if it's something like furnace, roof, that kind of thing, and we need a contractor to give us an estimate, then the buyer should be contacting a contractor to go out and give us an estimate. And then we write up the ROC, which is release of contingency accordingly. Be mindful of your deadline. So that's where people definitely get to make mistakes there. What I don't do, again, is tell them if I think they should or shouldn't ask for these things. Now, that doesn't mean when somebody sends me a spreadsheet, true story, of every single thing that they saw on the report that I didn't have to say, do you still want the house? Because it seems to me you thought that we were going to ask for all this stuff. And there's no seller that's going to fix everything that possibly got flagged from a home inspection. The properties in the state of Ohio are sold as is. The seller can sell it with a plug outlet that doesn't work. Or even a hole in the roof. But we can certainly ask for repairs, but we don't want to get too carried away because that can antagonize the seller. And then they can, by the way, void the contract. So just like the buyer has the right to back out because they're not happy with the inspection, when you write up that ROC or repair request, the seller has the right to void the contract. So be very well aware of that. Questions on inspections and negotiating repairs. If you're representing the seller and you get the release of contingency or a repair request addendum, you're just going to contact them and let them know this is what the buyer's asking for. My conversation goes like this. This is what the buyer's asking for. We can do all of it. We can do some of it, or we can do none of it. And then be aware that the buyer has the right to then say they don't want the house. So you can decide what we think we want to do. I would urge you all, and I'll give you a story on this, to make sure if and when possible that the buyer picks the contractor who's making the repair, not the seller. It can come back and bite you, and I know this, and I just let it happen on a listing of mine. The agent wrote up the repair request, and she was very vague about who was doing it, so my seller just took it upon himself to go ahead and make one was an electrical repair, and the other was an HVAC repair, which is your furnace and AC. What I didn't know was that my seller was a licensed electrician, which is great. He's a licensed electrician. That doesn't mean that the buyer wanted him to do the electrical repairs. Yes, in fact, he's licensed to do so, but once we got through the repairs and then we asked for a copy of the paid in full receipt. So note this, when the repairs are made, we want a copy of the paid in full receipt, and I'll explain why in a minute. My seller, I said, hey, can we get a copy of the paid in full receipt for the HVAC and the electrical repairs? He sent them over. And guess what? It was his company. And so of course, when the buyer got that, and this is like a week before closing, they flipped out. They didn't like, and they didn't feel comfortable, even though my seller was a licensed electrician, that he did the repairs himself. So that caused a problem. And so what I said to the agent was, well, nowhere on your addendum here did it say that your buyer wanted to choose the person to do the repair, or that it even had to be a licensed contractor. So be very careful how you're writing your repair request. I think it should always say this: buyer and seller agree to the following. Buyer 2, choose the licensed contractor to fix the following repairs that the seller is paying for. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That will make sure that your buyer is the one who's picking. It's also on your behalf, just like in my situation, that the buyer would have picked. Had the buyer picked the contractor, we wouldn't have had to have this argument that my seller did the repairs. Now we had to bring another electrician in to look at the work that the seller did. And of course, he's really pissy about it because he did it right. Well, guess what? He didn't. There was issues. So somebody had to pay for the electrician to come take a look. And then someone had to pay for the revised repairs. So guess who had to pay for those things?
The buyer.
No. The buyer threatened to back out because of it.
So the electrician that fixed it the first time had to pay for it?
Me and the agent split the cost. Because both buyer and seller, being very stubborn, were going to void the contract. You don't want to pay for an estimate for another electrician to come out, which costs us $160, and then another $200 for the additional repair. Because it was a big transaction and we didn't want it to fall apart over a couple $100. I don't recommend you guys paying for things, but sometimes I'm going to make $10,000 or I'm going to make nothing and start this process all over again to cough up a couple $100. So be very careful with that. I gave this example on Monday, and I want to wrap it up here with inspections so we can move on. But somebody in our group sold a house and they didn't do inspections, which is fine. But the seller disclosed during the pending period that there was a leak from the upstairs bathroom into the kitchen ceiling and that they would fix it. Great. Thank you so much for letting us know. And thank you so much for fixing it. What that agent who's in our coaching didn't know, because it was his first transaction, that he should have gotten that in writing, even though it wasn't something like a repair request they were asking for from an inspection. That should have been in writing. Everything like that should be in writing. Everything should be in writing. If it's not in writing, then they could not do it. In any case, that agent in our group also didn't ask for a paid in full receipt before closing. Buyer moves in the house, guess what? Every time they take a shower, the ceiling starts to leak in the kitchen. So now we're asking for the paid in full receipt and we didn't get one. So I'm not sure where he landed with it, but it seems to me the seller didn't actually follow through. They gave him a name of a contractor who now won't return his call. So again, who do you think's going to now pay for not only a plumbing leak, but a ceiling repair? It's probably going to be the agent. So that needs to happen. We have to be very careful about those kinds of things. So make sure that the buyer picks the contractor. Make sure you get a copy of the paid in full receipt. Check the status on an appraisal. It should absolutely be ordered immediately. This is another thing I'll point out to you guys, that sometimes, I don't know what, fall through the crack isn't the right word, but can go on and on and on before it gets ordered. So we recently had this on a listing of ours, and the buyer's agent said that, oh, the buyer didn't want to pay for the appraisal yet until we do the home inspection. This is a common thing that's absolutely unacceptable. The appraisal has nothing to do with the home inspection. I don't care if you think you're worried about the contract falling apart at home inspection and you want to save yourself the money for the appraisal. If you wait 2 weeks to order the appraisal, it could take till week 3 for the appraiser to get out there and a whole nother week for the appraisal to come back. When that appraisal comes back, then it goes to the lender and it goes to the buyer. By the way, it doesn't go to the seller or the listing agent. By the way, it doesn't even go to the buyer's agent. The only time the agents or the sellers see an appraisal is if it under appraises or it's flagged for repairs or both. Otherwise, it goes to the buyer and it goes to the bank. Then it has to go through underwriting. And that could take some time too. So now we're never going to close on time if they wait to order the appraisal. That should be done as soon as loan application is made. So as a listing agent, I need to make sure what's happened with the appraisal. Why haven't we ordered the appraisal? As well as a buyer's agent talking to the lender about that. Sometimes I don't know if that comes up because the buyer brings it up or their lender does. And my fear is that sometimes, sorry, lenders out there in the world, that they're the ones putting an idea in the buyer's head. This is why it's also really important that we have lending partners that we love and trust and work with us because they know what we expect, which is don't put ideas in my buyer's head because you think it's what's helping them when actually in the end it's hurting them because they will be in breach of contract if we don't close in time.
How do you know who usually ends up paying for repairs? Like if I was the agent and like that, and I'm representing the buyer.
So when the buyer's asking for, if the buyer's asking for repairs in the proper way and the seller agrees to the repairs, the seller's paying for the repairs.
Okay.
In my situation, it's because my stupid seller went and did the damn work himself when he shouldn't have. I had no idea that he was an electrician. I've known him for 8 years and he's always told me he was a teacher. And so I thought he was a teacher as well as his wife's also a teacher. What I didn't know is when he said he was a teacher is that he works for an apprenticeship company who teaches electricians. So who knew, or why would I ever think to say, hey, by the way, Jerry, you're not going to do the repairs yourself, right? Like who could ever anticipate that? But it should have been written on the addendum properly by the other agent to begin with. So we could have cleared that up easily. But in most cases, the seller's agreeing or not to do the repairs. By the way, the only repairs that are going to be required are either by the lender because it's FHA or VA, and sometimes conventional comes back with required repairs too. Those are required per the loan. So those are going to happen. Also be aware of where you sell real estate. There are something called point of sale inspections, which would be due to well and septic. Also in the city of Cleveland, some of the areas around Cleveland have required inspections. So I know Lakewood is one of those big areas that has a list of different inspections. So be mindful of where you sell houses at, whether you're the listing agent or the buyer's agent. In any case, a seller required repair would also be septic.
So if the seller refuses to pay,
The deal is probably going to fall apart.
so you wouldn't ask your buyer to pay or you wouldn't pay?
So I would not pay. In this situation, because of this electrical story I just told you about, it was a very minimal thing for us to pay for it because of my seller's mistake for doing the repair himself. Had he not done the repair himself, that would have been off the table. But no, I'm not usually jumping in and paying. So it's either the seller is going to pay or the buyer is just going to wait till after they get in the house and they can do the repair themselves.
Okay.
Okay, and that's all negotiable. That's all negotiable. A buyer can, by the way, do their own repairs. Like FHA will allow a buyer to do repairs that are required for their loan before closing. Those kind of things have to be done before closing. All right. Immediately
Gina,
after
I have a question, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanna
No,
know.
go ahead.
So with the FHA, if repairs are required for FHA appraisal, you're saying that a buyer can actually, I was always told that a buyer can't make repairs on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, they can. VA does not allow buyers to do their own repairs,
Okay, that's
but
good to know.
FHA does. So a buyer
FHA does.
could, and so thank you for asking that too, because here's the other thing. Do not mistake home inspection from appraisal.
Right,
Appraisal, when it's VA and FHA, comes along with something else in addition to price, right? They also have a list of criteria that the house condition has to be able to do an FHA or a VA loan. Oftentimes people think that's an inspection. It's not. They just have to look for these health and safety violations. So let's just use the example, a house we recently toured as a group had basement steps that had no railings, and the wood was kind of cracked and paint was peeling and it was splintered. So one of the things I mentioned in that tour was, this is a huge FHA and VA violation. Quite honestly, even conventional might want the railings in this because it was sort of a dangerous situation. So when the appraiser comes in, they're going to say, here's the number the house appraises for, but also a condition of my loan is these steps are going to need to be sanded and repainted, as well as 2 railings go in. If it's an FHA, the buyer could say, I'll just go in and do it because I know the seller's not. The buyer can physically go in the house with the seller's permission, make the repair, appraiser comes back out, and then we're good to go. VA, that's a hard no.
Got it.
But the buyer needs to understand this, and have I had buyers do their own repairs? Absolutely. But know this, you're having to say to your buyer, and by the way, I would get that written up in the addendum, buyer to do the repairs, and everybody agrees the buyer can do that, or buyer can pay for the contractor to do it. They need to understand, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, are you saying that you're okay spending money on a repair for a house that hasn't closed yet? They need to understand that. And usually in that case, I want the house, the seller's not going to do it, and yes, I'm willing to do it. So they sometimes go over their self and do it when it's something like sanding and painting, or they just pay the contractor to do it. Let's see. So that we were kind of just talking about that too. So if it doesn't appraise or it has repairs, that's going to have to be negotiated. Those are the conditional repairs that have to be done. Home inspection repairs, no have to. Appraisal repairs have to. Unless the inspection repairs are well and septic related, those aren't required to be done. Well, pest could be. So if it's a FHA or VA, we can have a whole separate story with pest. Pest inspection is only required with a VA loan. You don't have to do a pest inspection with FHA or a conventional. USDA might require it as well. So you need to be aware of those things as well. As I said, if the house doesn't appraise in the story, like I told you earlier, we took a 185 offer. It appraised at the listing price, which was 175. We had to negotiate that price drop. In our situation on this listing, the buyer absorbed half of it and my seller only had to come down 5,000 then. So that's a whole nother thing. They don't have to totally come down. By the way, they don't have to come down, but they aren't going to be able to sell the house to this buyer. Be aware of this. VA and FHA appraisals, those stick with the house for a period of time. So what that means is we could say, sorry, we're not lowering the price. And then the next buyer that comes along, they're going to have to use that appraisal if it's a VA or FHA. If it's conventional, we don't have to worry about it. But so VA and FHA appraisals stick with the house for a period of time. I want to say it's 90 days, but it could be 6 months. The regulations keep changing. So be aware of that. So that's going to be my conversation with my seller. Hey guys, listen, your house and price point is probably going to be another FHA buyer. So then this same appraisal is going to come up again. So do we really want to start all over again and take our chances with another buyer when we're already this close to closing and we know this is going to stick with the house now? Let me also mention this. Make sure when you represent a seller that they do not turn off their utilities prior to home inspection and appraisal. They will absolutely not be able to inspect and appraise the house without utilities on. When people move out, they think that it's time just to shut everything off. Matter of fact, with that said, they should never shut the utilities off. All they need to do is transfer them in their name. When you represent a buyer and it's a vacant house, or you know the seller has recently moved out, please make sure you contact the listing agent and say, hey, I know the house is vacant, or I know the buyer or the seller has moved out. The utilities are still on. Your buyer is going to have to pay for a re-inspect for a home inspector and or an appraiser to go back out when the utilities are not on. So that's something that comes up occasionally as well. Not on an occupied house, but it's going to on a not occupied house.
You said the inspector can inspect or the appraiser can't do the appraisal?
Neither.
Oh, okay.
Because they can't check electrical, they can't check plumbing if water and electric and all that's off. Not to mention if it's winter time and the gas is shut off and the pipes freeze or something. We also don't want those pipes to be winterized. We cannot inspect them if they are. Send escrow instructions to the title company. So that's the form that how you get paid. That's something that you're gonna fill out. You're gonna fill it out for your portion of the transaction. That particular document that's in dot-loop says buyer or seller representation. You only fill out the portion that pertains to you and your client. You aren't expected to do it for the other side. Both agents are gonna send their own set of escrow instructions in. I have an example in dot-loop of how to fill all that paperwork out in templates. Do your commission in command. So before we talked about a few slides up that you're gonna submit your compliance in command. Now you're also gonna submit your commission in command. You'll learn how to do that if you don't now. Set up a final walkthrough if needed. So a final walkthrough is the repairs were made, we got the paid in full receipts, but we want to actually go to make sure that we can see that those repairs were made. And sometimes buyers just like to do a walkthrough because they want to make sure that when the sellers moved out, they didn't damage any walls or anything like that. So the buyer has the right to do a walkthrough. It also says so on our purchase agreement. Attend the closing when possible. I most definitely attend for a buyer. Sometimes it's impossible to do for a seller. I say that only because the seller closing lasts sometimes 10 minutes. The buyer's closing lasts 45 minutes. So sometimes the sellers don't even go together. Those pop in and sign. Try to attend when you can. We don't want our goodbye with our clients to be not at the closing. We want to be there to support them. There's nothing that we're doing as an agent at the closing, but being there as moral support. Question?
Sorry, I was gonna
Yeah.
say, so. It was quicker. Do you usually get like your buyer something? for
Good question.
something, Or
So-
is that for an open, like I've seen where people get them gifts for something, but I
Yep.
don't know what it was.
So I've got that right on here. So yes, so we'll talk about that. So a couple things about gifts. If I'm not paying for something, which is most cases, so like in this transaction that I just had, since I had to spend a couple $100, that's their gift. You're welcome. Like I'm not also gonna bring you a gift. That was your gift. If I had to cut my commission for any reason, that's your gift. Also, this is just me. If this person was such a pain, I hate to say it, in my ass, this entire transaction, I'm not really buying them a gift.
Yeah.
Like, it's a personal thing, you know?
Mhm.
But
Is
if,
it housewarming because they're moving in or like?
so I typically do gifts for buyers and not necessarily for sellers.
Yeah.
Unless my seller's buying a house too,
Mhm.
then I'm typically doing it for a buyer.
Okay.
So, and that could be a variety of things. You want to keep it pretty low cost. We have an agent here, Rachel, who has a company called Rachel's Ugly Pies. They're, I think, $18 for a pie. I think food's a great gift and that's what I tend to give.
Okay.
It's easy, simple. People tend to like pie, so that's what I do. There's gifts on different levels. If I get a referral from somebody, I give them the gift. I give them a little gift card for the referral and then something else at actual closing too.
Or referral fee? For.
I mean a referral, not from another agent.
Oh,
Okay. I mean a referral from like my neighbor's mom's buying a house kind of a thing.
Okay.
So, yeah. Let's see. So a couple other things after the walkthrough. You want to coordinate possession and key transfer. Good luck, Mace. That means you need to contact the listing agent and say, hey, how am I gonna get the keys? I would, as a listing agent, be waiting for the buyer's agent to reach out to me to ask how they're gonna get the keys, but if they haven't, I might wanna call them and say, hey, guys, I'm gonna be, taking the lockbox down and the sign down, and you never asked me how you're gonna get the key. So typically, I prefer if the listing agent just leave the key in the lockbox, and then I'll go to the house and get the key out of the lockbox. Be very well aware of possession. If it's immediate possession, that is not happening at the closing. That is happening when the deed records. How do we find out the deed records? Because the title company tells us. Now, depending on who the title company is, you need to make sure you've got that communication. Sometimes there's title companies that just don't send out that email. I know American Title Solutions definitely sends out an email to everybody saying, I think I also get a text message. Good news, we've filed and recorded and funds have been dispersed. If there's possession time, and I know I'm going to go a couple minutes over here, so I'll try to wrap it up so we have also time for questions, but if there is possession time and we're closing on Wednesday and there's, let's say, 3 days possession. If the deed records today on Wednesday, then today is day 1, 2, 3. And then whatever your contract says, I think Legacy says 4 PM on the day of possession. That's when the keys get exchanged. That's also when the utilities should be turned into the new buyer's name. The seller, so up there it says, make sure you transfer utilities. So sellers need to make sure they contact the utility companies to have them out of their name for the date of possession, not the date of closing, the date of possession. Not shut off, because then the buyer has to pay reconnect fees. And we don't want an angry buyer having to come back and try to collect reconnect fees. So the seller can understand that they're going to be out of their name for that day as long as the buyer calls. If the buyer doesn't call, then they'll get shut off. So when you work with the buyer, make sure you tell them, contact the utility companies right away to make sure everything is going to go in your name for the date of possession. The days of possession are really important. If everybody signs today on Wednesday, but they don't sign till 4:30 this afternoon, it is not recording today. Even if they e-file the title company, the chances of it recording today are very slim. It's going to be tomorrow. Then that means tomorrow's day 1 of the 3 days. So you can see how that could be very different. And I promise it seems like a simple little tiny thing, but it becomes a big issue because someone's got their U-Haul truck out in the parking lot at the title company thinking they were going to get the keys at closing. It is our job to make them understand that that's not going to ever be the case.
So if they did it on Thursday, I'm assuming they're not open on weekends, right? Or
Correct, but the days for possession are going to count. So if they did a closing on Thursday and it's 3 days possession, they would still get the keys on the weekend. But that brings up another good point. So we recently had Memorial Day. Assuming you had a Friday closing late in the day and it was immediate possession. So let's talk about immediate possession. Immediate possession. Immediate possession still means at recording. So let's just use the example of a couple weeks ago when it was Memorial Day weekend. The buyers came in, they signed at 8:30 in the morning on a Friday before Memorial Day, but the sellers didn't come in until 3. And the deed did not, in fact, record. They are not getting possession until Tuesday because of the holiday with Monday. Because the deed won't have recorded in time. So that means the deed is not going to record Friday, not Saturday, not Sunday, and now not Monday. It's going to be Tuesday. So imagine the screaming conversation you're going to have with the buyer when they thought they had the whole Memorial Day weekend. So note to self, do not put on your contract when you're selecting closing dates to be a Friday. Then you don't have those problems. And then make sure if the title company, and let me also say this, the date on the contract for closing is a target date. Target date that we aren't scheduling the closing, the title company is. So they have to get clear to close from the lender. They need to make sure title work's done. Everybody's got all their ducks in a row, and then they'll contact the clients to schedule. They don't always do it on the date we set on the contract. Like I said, that's a target date. I prefer not to have Friday closings, especially if there's immediate possession, if there's a risk that we won't record that same day because of moving. So make sure we have our ducks in a row about that. Make sure you contact the agent and see how you're going to get the keys as well. Closing packet, I always bring a closing packet. They're just like how you have a buyer packet for your buyers and a listing packet for your sellers. I equally so have a closing packet, a variety of things that you can put in a closing packet. I think I have an example in the drive. It's also something that we work on when we do our marketing packet workshop. Set up the Set up client in, to set up the client in your past client drip campaign. So now that you've closed, this person is a new past client. So now they're already in my database, but now they're gonna be in my database as a past client. Because I'm going to do different things to market to in the future to be able to get their business in the future as a past client. And then always sending a thank you card for their business as well. Okay, that was a lot of information, I'm aware, in a short time. We'll open it up to questions. Hmm?
Anybody else had any?
Yeah.
So we were talking about closing, you're talking about like closing day, making sure you're there. What does the closing day actually look like? Like, where is this at? Is
Title
this
company.
signing paper?
Yep, it's a title
Okay.
company. Yep, so if they're doing a loan, the lender prepares the documents and they send them to the title company for the title company to then have the signing.
Okay, and you said that doesn't take very long?
The buyer's portion is about half hour to 45 minutes. The seller's portion can be 10 minutes, it could be 20. It depends on really the client and how much they want to read.
Okay.
Other questions?
Oh, and then this might seem like an obvious question. So
That's okay.
did the appraiser the one who decides the price of the house then before you put it on the market? I thought you did the
No.
appraisal after it was.
Yep. So the appraisal happens during the pending time period. So the appraiser goes out when the lender for the buyer orders the appraisal.
So where do you get the actual price from in the beginning? Is that just what the buyer?
That's a
or the seller
CMA.
Wants to.
Yeah, so when we set the price for the listing price, that would be us as an agent going out to a listing appointment and we're bringing a comparable market analysis with us.
Okay,
The appraisal is somewhat similar, but they have a whole different kind of system about putting together that
you said you bring them,
comparable market analysis. That's what I was just printing.
oh. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, he's going to his.
Yeah,
now.
he's
Oh,
going to
wow.
his, yeah, he's going to listing appointment, yeah. What else, guys?
It's
Yes.
always the buyer's decision though, right? Or I should say the sellers to actually decide the price of the home. 'Cause you were saying-
Yeah, so we can recommend a price. I'm always recommending. Here's the price recommendation I have. However, we can have a discussion around that and really it is up to the seller. We don't make that decision. It's up to them to set the price. But it's also up to us to say, you know what? That's so extremely outlandish that we never will get this house sold. So I don't agree and I don't want to do business with you. Like, we're not gonna probably do that, but that we can do that. Will I take an overpriced listing? Yes, under the conditions that they understand, we might need to do price reductions.
So you said you bring the comparable market analysis to that's not the inspection, is it?
That's a listing appointment before they list.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Yeah.
awesome. All right, guys, if no one has anything else, I've kept you long enough. So I appreciate you coming. Let me know if you need anything. And again, that form is in the drive. Anyone who's not in coaching, let me know and I can send it to you as well. Thanks, guys.